Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Plant Medicine Podcast. I'm your guide on this journey, Dr. Lynn Marie Morski, and today we have a bonus episode. Today we are talking integration with Dr. Ryan Westrum. You may have heard many of the guests talk about integration in previous episodes, and you may be wondering, what are they talking about? So I wanted to throw in this episode so that if you're curious, you can know what integration is and its importance in the psychedelic process. Now, before we get started, just wanted to throw another shout out of love to our sponsor, Octagon Biolab CBD. People ask me all the time, how has CBD affected you? And luckily, I'm not in pain a lot of the time. So I tell them, look, the main thing it does for me is sleep. I wear this Aura ring and I can measure how much different my sleep is, especially the deep sleep, when I'm using a high dose of Octagon Biolab CBD. And some people are like, oh, high dose. And I've said, yeah, there's a difference between the amount you should take for sleep and amount you should take for pain, and there's all kinds of different doses for different uses. And that's another reason I love Octagon, is because it comes in a wide range of dose options so that you get the most out of your purchase. If you are interested in trying Octagon Biolab CBD, head on over to octagonbiolabs.com and you can use the code PLANTMEDICINE to get 20% off. Again, that's octagonbiolabs.com and use the code PLANTMEDICINE for 20% off. All right, one last disclaimer before we get started. As always, the Plant Medicine Podcast is a podcast intended for let me say all the words at once. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Please do not make medical decisions without seeking the advice of your personal physician. All right, now, without further ado, we're going to talk to Dr. Ryan Westrum. Let me give you a little bit about his background. Dr. Westrum is co-author of the Psychedelic Integration Handbook. He's an internationally recognized psychedelic integration expert. For more than 15 years, his primary focus has been working with individuals and groups, facilitating experiential therapy and integrating psychedelic journeys into healing and personal transformation. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Westrum.
Thank you, Lynn Marie. It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have me here with you. I'm glad.
Yes.
I'm glad we're both enjoying this process, Ryan.
I love it. I love it.
Amazing. I have to tell everybody how we came into each other's world. You reached out to me on Instagram and you said, I've written this book and I'd love you to take a look. And it is called the Psychedelics Integration Handbook. And so I was very excited when this massive tome showed up at my door. I was like, what is this piece of mail that weighs like 2.5 pounds? And it's this masterpiece that you and Dr. J, I'm going to butcher his name, Dufresheau?
You said it perfectly. Exactly. J. Dufresheau.
Wow.
French.
Yes. Wow. That was a very lucky first guess. You guys have put together an incredible piece of work here. The introductions are by Stanislav Grof, Dr. Grof, a name a few people may be familiar with, and Dr. James Fadiman. So if those two gentlemen say this is an incredible book, that's probably, there's no more Amazon reviews you need besides those two people.
Yeah, it was a deep honor to have them contribute that. They mean a great deal to both Jay and I, and it was an honor, really a privilege.
They're not just like blowing smoke. This is an amazing, amazing book. It's so long that I have to be honest, I have not gotten through every nook and cranny. I've gotten to the highlights of it, and that's what I want to talk about on the show with you today. But much gratitude for sending this to me. This is incredible. It's going to be a great resource for listeners if they're interested in learning more. So I read that bio. If you could just start off by telling us a little bit about what an integration therapist is.
Yeah, I think an integration therapist needs a definition, especially in today's culture with the renaissance of psychedelics. We sometimes have a parallel process of being identified as an underground therapist. And the most obvious thing, and I appreciated your disclaimer at the beginning, is an integration therapist does potential support at the beginning of someone considering doing plant medicines or a psychedelic journey. They work alongside the individual after with the integration, understanding what might have come about through the session. But what they do not do is they do not support them through the administration of the compounds. Just because of the fact of the underground being, I deeply value those therapists. I think they're beautiful people. But the integration specialist or therapist is one that's working with them in different modalities too. Lynn Marie, they might be dream work, they might do yoga exercises, they might integrate in classical CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and they might just invite journaling or any other modalities that support them in the preparation of psychedelic work.
Gotcha. Now, is this the person that somebody would come to if they were, look, like maybe they've come to this podcast and they hear about these different medicines and they have certain things they would like to address in their life, but they're not sure which medicine may be best to address it? Is that part of what you guys discuss with your patients?
That's exactly right. So what we do is we're not putting a square peg in a circle hole. We're trying to individualize it. You'll hear me say this over and over throughout my practice, as well as probably on this podcast, is making it your own. There's a divine reason why there's so many medicines, so many different ways of administering it, so many sets, so many environments to participate in. So we want to flush it out. And there's a great deal of time. It's not something spontaneous that you just say, I'm going to do this today, and then dive into it. There's nothing wrong with it, but preparation is a key component of the integration.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think a lot in this day and age where we try to avoid saying like what people should and shouldn't do. Like you should have integration, you should have preparation. But I think what we all mean, if we say that, is that you're going to get one experience if you have it and one experience if you don't. And they may be the same experience, but it seems like you're stacking the deck a little bit more in your favor to have the transformation you're looking for if you take a more integrative approach with preparation and integration afterward.
Without a doubt. And what we like to say is it's subjective. It's very subjective to each individual. And I use a lot of times a focus on one intention or a broad view of many different intentions. And at the end of the day, Lynn Marie, we have to remind ourselves, we have to surrender into what the medicine's going to show us too. So I always say, it's not what we need, it's what we're given or what the medicine supports us with.
Yes. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, let's get into it. I pulled a few things out of the book that I would like you to expound on a bit. First thing here is you have a section on what factors contribute to psychedelic experiences. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the factors that contribute to a psychedelic experience could be a plethora. It could be past experiences, historical. It could be invited through what's going on right now in your biographical life. And we take that term from Stanislav Grof. It's a biographical idea of what's going on in your life. Moreover, psychedelic experiences could be happening with the environment. So what's going on in your environment, what's on the horizon. We have to take all these into consideration. And to bring it up to a little bit more cosmic level, we also we could look at astrology. We could talk about what's going on in the planets. We could talk about past life. So there's many different values that you should be at least conscious of. It doesn't mean that you have to have, your systematic plan of, I have to look at my astrology reading. I have to check my cards. I have to check my, date of birth. I have to see what's going on for my job. But psychedelic experiences can bring out a tremendous amount of information that we're not necessarily aware of. And so any preparation is going to support that.
I appreciate that. And I'd love to insert something here for any of my super Western medicine, left brain people who just heard cosmic and astrology, and you haven't done maybe too much work in the psychedelic realm. I ask you to keep a slightly open mind here because and I think this has definitely been my experience. I'm sure there was a point in my life where, aside from the fact that I was a Virgo and I definitely knew that and I followed every last thing that it says for Virgos, aside from that, I didn't really so much believe in all the other things. And then you start going through these experiences and you start to get these kind of synchronicities that open your mind to what's possible beyond the visual kind of super scientific realm. And so in this episode, things may seem a little bit either super based in science or super way out there, but keep an open mind because it's all part of the journey. I'm pretty sure that if you get somebody who comes to you and they are not terribly open to the idea of the cosmos and all these other things, it's not something you necessarily force on them. I'm sure, like you said, every individual is different.
Sure. And it brings up the point of walking the tightrope of science and concrete sequential things in this world, because we do need to know our zip code at the end of the day. And then also the cosmic, right? The level of, hey, being aware of the synchronicities. I've had clients never understand what the Ganesh is, the elephant god of Hindu culture, and they have them come up. And it gives them a cartography or now a map of spirit when they were agnostic or they were considered atheist. So you have to kind of dive into not only science, but also have the gradient of almost what I would consider a pendulum of openness.
Yes, I appreciate that. Uh, Now, we talk a lot about, okay, integration is huge, but if you could, and we haven't really stopped to say what integration is. So there's a section where you address what do we mean by integration?
Sure. And what integration is expounding on being able to digest what has happened. And we also formulate it as what the preparation that you need to do in advance. So integration is, I really like to use terms of incubation, incubating the experience, taking in aftercare directly after. We go through stages of integration. There's also an opportunity to do it incremental. So incremental integration isn't like, oh, hey, we had this experience, and Lynn Marie, it's over. Now let's digest it, put it in a little box, put it on a shelf, and call it a day. It's something that we're going to continue to involve incrementally. Something might come up. And so we use mind, body, spirit, obviously very, very classical in, the medical model and trying to connect all three. But we also are talking about using right brain, left brain integration, inviting in anything that's intuitive to you. One of the biggest things that I advocate is, well, what's your intuition asking? It really doesn't matter how many yoga classes you can take, right? That's the biggest kind of faux pas. Everyone's like, well, I meditate for 45 minutes and I do yoga for 3 hours. I'm integrating. Well, no, let's go outside and check what that person really wants to do to incubate it, to really keep it growing.
Yeah, I think that's super important because a lot of these ceremonies or journeys, you're given in one way or another messages, and they may be kind of the obvious consult download, like, okay, this medicine told me these specific things in almost word like form. For me, I get these consults that are very word like. For other people, it may be very imagery based. And if you're not used to interpreting images, you may come out of a ceremony without really understanding the message that the medicine had for you. And I'm assuming that this is part of what you work through in integration.
That's correct. So yeah, immediately, and I love your analogy, and thank you for sharing it. The idea of you getting word-like, almost kind of a dissertation or some synopsis of what you had. There's many people that will see things, so it will be so crystallized in symbols. And what my advice is, and what I advocate for, and again, this is make it your own, so I'm just giving direction, is if you have a natural tendency to have word-like experiences dropped on you or downloaded on you, challenge yourself to maybe take it in a more artistic manner through expression of dance or through expression of something not so linear. And the counter goes for the real kind of cosmic, oh, I have these symbols or these arts and crafts kind of visions. Well, challenge yourself to write it out, journal it, verbally record it. It's trying to, again, and that's that term integration. It's obviously a very catchphrase today, but trying to really embed the two together.
That's a great segue into what I was going to ask you about next, because the book has a number of integration exercises. Could you talk a little bit about some of these exercises that can help people in the integration period?
Without a doubt. Before I do that, I want to allow the integration exercise to be developed. So I want to, before even talking about any of these exercises, they need to be developed in what you feel comfortable with. The biggest component about all these integration exercises is you don't want to do something that feels like almost like clumsy. And so if you're familiar with something, if you use that, and I advocate for that deeply, is use something you already know and then expound on it. And you'll find breadth and depth within the integration exercise you're already comfortable with. And then start to almost build upon that foundation. And so one of them would be meditation, right? And throughout our book, to just segue into that, is we do that. We develop kind of core integration exercises, building sacred altars, finding sacred space. And all the while, to be very candid, is we want you to just present moment, be mindful of what that exercise is. if it's washing dishes, if it's cooking dinner, if it's talking with someone, be present to that experience. So these exercises are divine because they offer you an opportunity to sit with what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I saw one as I was flipping through talked about, I think it was drawing a mandala or working with,
Sure.
and it's funny because I've done a number of ceremonies and I've never had that
Mhm.
thought before, because it's funny that you brought it up. We don't know each other at all, but dancing is the
Mhm.
way I express everything. And so you just happen to
Oh,
say,
wow.
like, yeah, if you get consults, dance it out. I'm like, wow, of course there's no coincidences. This is, like,
Yep.
you have sensed that about me, and that's what's beautiful about this medicine, is that we finally realize that we're all connected enough to have this level of ESP that goes on there. But I love that, like, wow, there's a whole new thing I could try on for integration. And then you're like you said, you're doing two things. You're both integrating the experience and then expanding your own comfort zone a little bit and expanding your mind to therefore be able to integrate in the future in different ways.
Without a doubt. And that mandala exercise is fun because it's not just drawing, because I have the own insecurity of how good of an artist I am or whatever. So what we have to do is we have to challenge ourselves also then to enter into emotions, childlike or adult-like, where, oh my goodness, I'm not a good artist. So maybe what you want to do is cut pictures out, or, it's the classical vision board. But, or even you express yourself in dance. So someone might not be a good dancer. Well, dance like no one's watching. You got to challenge the emotion, right? You have to challenge and do it in the confines of your own safety. Don't let people judge you. And that's where the integration really comes in handy, is you personalize it in safety. Safety is paramount.
Yeah, and I think that works so well with what a lot of people get through these journey experiences, is kind of the ego disillusion in some of the experiences, where you realize, like, oh, why have I let what other people might think of me have such an impact on my life? And then you leave the experience, and that feeling can sometimes dwindle. And I think these exercises that you're bringing back, dance like no one's watching, sing like no one's listening, draw like nobody cares how good or bad it is kind of maybe a reminder of what that ego dissolution feels like.
Yes, and I love that you say that, because it's very linear that we have a tendency to compartmentalize the session, the experience, or the ceremony, and then we're like, oh, that's what that was. Well, the value of the integration exercises in making it more tangible is it ties the two together, and it expresses, oh yeah, great, I had a psychedelic session with psilocybin and I feel divine and connected with one, and then you just shut it off. Well, let's practice that. Let's integrate it. And so for those that love the westernized model, is let's make it concrete sequential. We need one foot in as much as we need one foot out. And what I mean by that is we can still have the psychedelic feeling, but we need to start integrating it into our life practically.
Yes, that's huge, because like you said, there's an entire feeling when you're in the ceremony that, like, this feeling will last forever and I will never again have an ego. And then let me tell you, that ego comes back, you know? And that's so valuable, to find ways in your life to remind you of the lessons that you learned. In one of my ayahuasca journeys, I was given homework to do
Mhm.
that would keep me remembering the things that I had learned. But that is a very unique experience. And I realized outside of that, mostly I was not given homework, and it would have been helpful for somebody to give me some exercises like this, because otherwise you're just thrown back into your daily life. The people around you don't know that anything happened necessarily in your psyche, and they're going to respond to you probably the same way. And you may just kind of fall back into old patterns.
Yeah, I analyze it and look at it similar to, like, if you go maybe to Europe, if you live in the United States, or you go to another country and you want to adapt that lifestyle that you had, and you try to acclimate it back into your life, and within a week you're back in your daily grind. And it's the same with psychedelics, is you have to be mindful and present to incorporate it in life. Otherwise, it just gets eaten alive. Doesn't, confuse it or negate it, but it does definitely water it down without doing active measures to keep it going.
Yeah, I love that last point. It's not that it's wrong to not do this. It's that, like we said at the beginning, you are likely to get a lot more out of it if you do.
Correct.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to the discussion about mindset. So, we've
Hmm.
heard in Michael Pollan's book and everywhere else that set and setting are very important. Can you talk a little bit about preparing your mindset for a psychedelic journey?
Without a doubt, the idea of a mindset can be set in, okay, we're coming in with some sort of focus. I personally engage people and offer people to have anything that they've already done. I talk about a 2 week preparation of a mindset because the mindset is what you're walking with. You could get in traffic right before you're going to your ceremony. We have to remember we're living in this, very lifestyle of speed and pace. We don't have the privilege of going to 2 weeks off before we ingest this. So we have to also remember each and everything that we're interacting with, be it someone at the door, be it a child issue at school, is going to affect what happens in that psychedelic ceremony. And I never underestimate that. And I speak about it in the book is you have to have this almost rigid preparation, bathing, using archetypal, expansive ways of ritualizing the experience is a large also aspect of mindset. So maybe bathing, maybe sweating, maybe fasting, doing all these things to get your mind prepared for the dive. I analogize it to skydiving. If you're scared, if you're going to jump out of an airplane, you should be somewhat scared, but you shouldn't be paranoid.
Yes, it sounds like a healthy level of fear. Like, yes, this is
Yeah.
a thing that has potential outcomes. And if you could talk a little bit about on that tip, that was not a thing that I had meant to bring up, but I think it's crucial at this juncture to talk about the fact that some people may be afraid of a quote unquote bad trip. Can you talk about maybe the reframing of that into a challenging experience?
Yeah, I believe all experiences are challenging. They're not bad. I can't qualify them as bad. But if you breathe, if you invite yourself to compare and do the appropriate preparation within integration or intentional setting, I have a fond and deep appreciation with being able to get something out of it. I think that you're going to get something fruitful out of it. I think it's going to be strong. I think it's going to be dynamic. I don't think the challenge or the bad, quote unquote, proverbial trip is going to hurt anybody as long as we segue into setting, as long as you have a guide, as long as you have an established environment, as long as you can talk it through. But the challenge is trusting that. Okay, the caveat, Lynn Marie, isn't that it's a bad thing that's going to happen to you. It's the individual's control and power that says, I knew this was going to happen. I knew I couldn't let go. And it's like the largest thing I fight with clients about is, well, what's it look like to let go? And when they're able to let go, I don't hear that many challenging or bad trips. So there is a tie of, can I let go of control? And oftentimes then I don't hear this like impending doom of the bad trip.
Yeah. And even the difference between viewing it as a bad trip, between viewing it as a bad trip
Yeah.
and viewing it as a challenging trip, there are lots of challenges. Climbing Mount Everest is a challenge, but the fact
Hmm.
that it is cold on Mount Everest is not bad. That is just what it is. It's part of the challenge, and lots of challenges can lead to growth. And many of these things that are seen as, okay, I did this journey and it wasn't all hearts and flowers and amazingness, doesn't mean that you're not getting something from it.
Right, right. And that's where I say explore and surrender. So I talk a lot about exploring and surrendering. And what I mean directly about that is giving the opportunity just to look at things and know when to surrender to the outcome. We have a tendency in our westernized civilization is to put an outcome on it. And that's the tragedy of even this psychedelic renaissance. I hear many people come in and say, I need this addiction stopped. I want this chronic depression out. And the first thing I have to do is be the grim reaper of psychedelics and say, we can't guarantee this as a pill, a wonder pill. You have to know that there might be a lot of trials and tribulations. Climbing Mount Everest is a great example. You're going to have to acclimate. You're going to have to get used to some things that you might uncover.
Yeah, and also like you said with the surrender is that it like part of, at least in my view, this whole self, because this is a piece in the personal development puzzle. Many of us are using this as, either we're trying to address a specific condition or maybe just up level our creativity or up level our equanimity somewhere in there. But while you're doing this work, a lot of it takes kind of the hindsight to look back, and that surrender piece you're talking about, at least for me, takes looking back and realizing all the times that something seemed quote unquote bad and it later led to something very beneficial. And
Oh,
part of that,
without a doubt.
yeah, part of that is the trusting. Like I've only had one, let's say, bad trip, and the bad thing about it was that nothing happened. And so to me, it wasn't even a challenging trip because it wasn't like, oh, I'm seeing dark, scary things. It was like I saw nothing. And there was a lot of self-judgment in the why didn't I have an experience? And in talking that out with somebody, in integrating, they said, I think these may be your roadblocks. And I think this other kind of like non psychedelic related personal development workshop will help you. And that workshop was extremely helpful. And so while I think nothing, quote unquote, came from the actual journey, tons came from the journey in a completely different way that I couldn't have seen coming.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that story. And it begs to say that you have to give time to integrate. You have to give time. It's not like, that's why I put aftercare in advance and maybe putting it on the shelf or letting it incubate, because something spontaneous might come about 3 weeks later, 2 months later, that you had no connecting to the psychedelic experience. And then you're like, aha, that's what that was.
I love that. It's
It's
so good
huge.
to know to adjust expectations. Don't think if something didn't happen during the ceremony or immediately after that there was no benefit.
Yeah, 90% of it is integration.
I love it. I love it. It's so true. So, on that, one other issue that I think a lot of people are, they come to me and they ask, should I do it this way or that way? Is it better or beneficial for them? They're asking me my advice, individual versus group settings. I'm assuming a lot of people come to you with the same question.
Yeah, it's a great question to ask. The first and foremost is people have an innate understanding of what could come out. And I need to elaborate, because what that is maybe they have sexual trauma. I'm also a sex therapist, so a great deal of my intersection of this work is sexual trauma and psychedelics. So right from the drop of the hat, I encourage people to feel safe. And so to answer the question where it delineates from group and individual, is the individual needs to know how safe they feel in community. I only do ceremony with ayahuasca in group, and every other thing I would do personally is individual, because of just the deep intimacy that I have. And that leads to talk about then what the plant is you're using. What, again, we could say there's a rubrics or some kind of grade that says, and that gets a little bit obsessive, but I've heard that from clients is, well, if I'm using this substance and I want this, should I be group or should I do individual? And I say again, and maybe it's my cop out, but it's subjective. The person has to know intuitively. You have to follow your intuition. Does the guide feel right? Does the community, have you met the community? Have you built rapport? A large portion, Lynn Marie, are going to Peru. They're going down to these jungles where they've never met anybody. That's courageous. And I admire anyone that's doing that. But there could be a lot of trauma that's coming out. And that's my disclaimer, is know a little bit about what you potentially might unpack.
I appreciate that
And
very much. Yeah. Continue.
yeah, no, it's just it. It becomes that level of nuance of, can you feel safe with the community? Can you feel safe with the guides? Can you translate this? You'd be alarmed at how many people I have had phone calls with down in Peru. They're coming back and they're discombobulated because it was too overwhelming because of the group. I'm not discounting groups. Don't hear me lean towards individuals. But I would encourage people to work individually to get what I would call their footing or foundation. Get the territory. get the cosmology, get the kind of cartography or the map of this work, because you don't know what's going to come, you know? Maybe do it in the sky of breathwork, where the compound, where they're doing breathwork in communities, but you're not like gone for 12 hours or 4 ceremonies in a week. It's, I'm a prudent kind of devil's advocate when it comes to this. Not everyone has to go in doing 4 ceremonies with a group, because that's hard to come out of.
Yeah, and also like you said, if you're down in Peru, it's really hard to like hit the escape button. You may have
Yeah,
like if and because a lot of these
yeah,
are like you said, they're multi-day ceremonies, and some of these
right.
places have a lot of people in them. And I know from my own experience, I'm okay with a small group of people. I'm not
Mm,
sure giant groups just for different reasons, and it may be a safety thing, or for me, like I don't love a
mm,
ton of extraneous noise, and so if there's like
mm.
a jillion people making different noises, I know I would be affected in a certain way. Some other people might love, they may be like raving extroverts and think like the more other person energy I have in the room, the better.
Yeah, you're bringing up a lot of good points, and I think just to be 100% contradicting, then maybe you want to challenge yourself. Maybe if you are so comfortable, and that's what led me into group ayahuasca, is I was so comfortable doing individual work that I said, okay, I need to step out of my comfort zone. So then me being contradicting would say, challenge your comfort zones too, when you're ready though, because you're playing with some intense energy and experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, my first ayahuasca ceremony, there were 22 people, and
Wow.
yeah. And I remember being in it feeling like whoa, because I mean you're very in a very open, obviously an emotional
Vulnerable.
space, very vulnerable space, and there's a lot of purging, and so that is a very sonorific thing. You can hear everybody else purging, and I remember that had like quite the effect on me at some point, but it was something that I could work through because I also had fears of my own purging. And so like the thought of like, oh my gosh, when I purge it will also sound like that. And I work, and part of the ego disillusion was I remember when I finally did purge, when I purged what came out, and it's funny because like I can't put a great description on this for somebody who has never undergone this, maybe they don't understand, but I purged out judgment. Like as I'm purging, like judgment was coming out, as in like don't worry that you're being judged, never worry again that somebody is judging a thing. And so, part like
Super
you said,
transformational.
yeah, part of that comfort zone stretch played a role, and I think every part of it always will. Is even if that thing is difficult, whatever part of the ceremony is, it's probably still going to play a role in your
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'd like to say on individual versus group is what we're speaking about is we've been using the words interchangeably as therapeutic experience and ceremonial experience. And right now, culturally speaking, the therapeutic experiences are being done individually because of the intimate traumas or the intimate healing or the addiction. And oftentimes, from my perspective, we use the term ceremony, which I deeply love, in potentially a more communal environment. You can have them interchangeable, and don't get me wrong, but there is a kind of a discernment I want to make is a lot of like the research right now is being done individually. And a lot of the ceremonies are done, you can do an individual ceremony, but are done in a group.
I appreciate that distinction. I had somebody write into the show and ask me to ask Dr. Garcia Romeo, the psilocybin researcher
Mhm.
from Johns Hopkins, ask why he doesn't do these in group settings. And so I did, and
Right.
he said it's just the number of additional factors that brings in. Like we were just talking about,
Yeah.
the sounds that other people are making. Maybe somebody has a wild experience and they want to get up and dance, and you're having a really inner experience, and it's like if you're doing it in a scientific like study therapeutic setting, they'd like to control for more variables. But I do appreciate that there's the getting your foot wet with more controlled variables versus later when you know the terrain a little better, being able to push your comfort zone.
Right. You've used the term synchronicity, and I call it spontaneous catalyst. These compounds are a spontaneous catalyst that we don't know what's going to come up. And then doing that, you compound it with 10, 15, or even 3 people. And it's beautiful, actually. It's quite beautiful. But that does add an element of like, okay, why is that person screaming? It either invites it into your psychedelic experience, or it completely transforms it into potentially a very challenging experience.
Yeah.
It's a spontaneous catalyst for many different things.
I love that you brought that up because I distinctly remember there was somebody laughing really like during a part of the ayahuasca ceremony on my second or third journey that was like we'd already been told to be quiet and she was like laughing hilariously and like I was just shooting so much judgment at her and it was in this ceremonial setting where I still had the medicine in me that was like, why are you judging that? And I realized it's because I am such a rule follower and I lack some of that carefree nature that I think I would benefit from. Like I think part of
Mm,
me was like, oh, I wish that
yeah.
I didn't care so much about the rules and I could just laugh carefree like she does. And that's not a thing that I walk around thinking on a daily basis, but the fact that we were in that group setting and that person was behaving in that way offered that to become part of the message I got.
I love it. Yeah, it's interwoven, isn't it? It is all interwoven.
It really is. It's incredible. Since you brought up about what people, they call you in certain situations, before we wrap up, do you want to talk about a few of the most common things people like questions that maybe you get that I haven't covered from the book?
Sure. As it pertains to integration, is how long do we have to integrate, and when is it appropriate to do it again? And one of the things that I'm been really kind of advocating for is a conscious ingestion of this medicines, the compounds, because I think we have this new renaissance, and there's a lot of people trying to do what I've witnessed is catch-up work. Because now the book Michael Pollan comes out, which I adore, and the Renaissance, and they go, well, I need to do it, and how often should I be doing it? And my biggest thing is it's always going to be here to be done. And I simply ask people to, really formulate a purpose of why they want to do it. And why is it so important that they need to be doing it such and such? Some sober time is beneficial. Sober time to me, Lynn Marie, translates to integration,
Yeah.
reflection, expounding on the last experience. Okay, and just because you haven't done it your entire life or haven't participated in it, it's vital to say, okay, is this time to do it, and why? And I'd love to leave it with an acronym, and that's PREP, and that's purpose, reflection, reflect on what the last experience was, and have I digest everything. What's the purpose was the P, the reflection is have I digested everything? Have I integrated it, for lack of better terms? What's my expectation? What am I doing this for? Why am I diving again? I just did LSD last week and I want to do psilocybin this week. Have I really compartmentalized and understood everything I did? And lastly is what's my ultimate potential for it? And I differentiate expectation microcosmically in myself, my personal expectation, and what's the ultimate potential that could come my way. I've seen many people, they're doing it so quickly that they have an amazing aha experience only to be just taken down to the dirt, and it shakes them. And so I'm just, prudently, pragmatically asking for people to really recognize how often they need to be doing this medicine work. It sounds
Yes.
fun to do it every weekend, but it's a little too much.
Agreed. Agreed. Was it Alan Watts who said, "When you get the message, hang up the phone"?
Right? Yeah, it was exactly him, and I
Yeah.
would I would concur. I would
Yes.
concur.
Right. Yeah. You don't need. Is there more message? Is there more message? No. Like, there's a point at which you're
Yeah.
feeling not called, or you. It's either feeling not called, like, oh, I definitely don't want to do it now, or now you're just not feeling a call. Do not
Yeah.
make a call where there isn't one. You don't need to be
Right. There's
constantly
only so
searching.
many.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
only so many machine elves that need to be like eating our face, or like, like stories from, flying unicorns to tell us that you're a good father, a good, mother, right? At the end of the day, we
Right.
have to like walk. What I say is, again, keeping one foot in reality. It's important.
Absolutely. I cannot thank you enough for this conversation, Dr. Westrum. I appreciate all the work you've put into that book. I have a link to it. There will be a link to it on plantmedicine.org so everybody can check it out. And where can people find you? And I'm sure the book is on Amazon, correct? But where can they find you?
Yep, the book is on Amazon. I have two websites. One of them is psychedelicintegration.net, and the other website is Healing Souls, SOULSLLC.com. And as I alluded to, I am both a sex therapist and a psychedelic integration therapist. So I work both modalities and give kind of compartmentalized websites, both around sexuality and then around psychedelic integration.
Gotcha. Thank you so much again for coming on and sharing with us.
It's a pleasure, and thank you so very much.
Absolutely. All right. For everyone else out there, until next time.